Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where we recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host Anthony Sassano and today's the 19th of July 2022. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So the Protocol Guild is now being vested out a 500 ETH contribution from Nouns DAO towards the pilot program. So this ETH will vest for 1 year directly to 116 protocol contributors. This is really cool. I've talked about the Protocol Guild a lot on the refuel before about how it's kind of this experiment in kind of raising ETH from different treasuries throughout, I guess, like the Ethereum ecosystem and redirecting the ETH raised to, I guess, like protocol contributors, core developers, public goods on Ethereum. So you can see here that it's a collective of 110 Ethereum core protocol contributors, but I think that's gone up to 116. So this is basically getting kind of like ETH to the people that build the network, essentially, right? Or kind of like help to build the network. So very, very cool to see that this has started kind of vesting out here. And this joins, I guess, all the others that are vesting out. You can kind of like see a screenshot here of the others that are vesting out. So there's Uni, LDO, ENS, and they're kind of like ETH here from Nouns DAO and some other ETH are vesting out to these protocol contributors. And it's not a paltry sum. It's worth a lot, right? Like if you can kind of like look at the funds here across the different tokens, you have $3.5 million worth of Uni, $2.8 million worth of Lido, $2.1 million worth of ENS, and about almost $800,000 worth of ETH here. So very, very cool to see this. Very cool to see that the core protocol contributors are getting rewarded for their work. Like this has obviously been a kind of like issue within the Ethereum ecosystem for a little while. Like how do we fund public goods sustainably, and especially how do we fund core developers? Because there's this common thing that gets brought up where it's like, okay, well, people don't have incentive to work on the Ethereum core protocol because they know that they're not going to get kind of like a large allocation of ETH as kind of like a bonus or something like that, because obviously the ETH market cap is much bigger. There is no kind of like pre-sales or no private rounds to come, and like with a new layer one. And when you join, I mean, you could join the Ethereum Foundation, you probably have some ETH getting kind of vested out to you there from a bonus structure or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but generally it's just much harder to get your hands on some ETH here or some kind of like money for your work. So it obviously would pay more to go work for another layer one. And this does happen. Like people do go work for other layer ones because it's just kind of more worth their while money wise. But I think that just looking at that problem and thinking that it's not not something that should be solved is obviously not the right way to go about it. So that's where things like Gitcoin came in, just public goods in general came into the picture. And obviously the Protocol Guild now has come in and basically said, well, no, we need to make sure that we can fund the kind of like future of Ethereum core protocol development and just anyone who contributes to the core protocol and just anyone who contributes to public goods on Ethereum more generally. And they should be rewarded for the value that they're driving to the network. Because when you really think about it, we all talk about how big of a catalyst the merge is for the price of ETH. Well, think about all the people that are working on the merge, working to make it a reality. I would wager that like a decent amount of them have very little ETH because they just came in much later. They weren't able to purchase much because maybe they didn't have much money to begin with. And they're contributing in a really, really positive way, but they aren't really seeing the, I guess, like rewards for that contribution just because there is no kind of like central entity besides maybe the Ethereum Foundation that has the ETH to kind of like a spare here. And the Ethereum Foundation does a lot, don't get me wrong. They give a lot of kind of like money away through grants programs and things like that. But in terms of getting it to core protocol developers or core protocol contributors in general, the Protocol Guild kind of stepped up and said, let's do this kind of pilot program. Let's see how it goes and let's see if we can continue. Because at the end of the day, getting a small percentage of the treasuries on Ethereum is a really great way to go about it, because these treasuries and these tokens and these products really live or die on Ethereum based on all the work that's been done up until that point, the work that's been done in the future to improve the protocol and to kind of like make sure the protocol doesn't just basically fall over through all the core development work that's been done. So very cool to see this. I'm glad that the contributors are getting rewarded just as they should. All right, so an announcement out of Obol Labs today. So they have announced the onboarding to their first public testnet for at-home validators known as Athena. So the Athena testnet is kind of like now live, and if you're an at-home validator and you want to contribute or participate in this public testnet, you can. There's a whole thread about this and a blog post, of course. So for just a quick recap of what Obol Network is trying to do, they're trying to enable something called distributed validator technology. So what they're building out right now is a distributed validator middleware client and kind of have been running devnets and obviously now a testnet for this. So basically what DVT or distributed validator technology allows everyone to do is it allows one Ethereum validator to run across multiple machines. In theory, all of these machines could be controlled by a single entity. However, we aspire to use DVT amongst groups where a combination of operators collaborate to run Ethereum validators. The Obol network aims to foster trust minimized staking in groups to enable people to create, test, run, and coordinate distributed validators. With that in mind, this and the future testnet will require groups of humans to collaborate together to run nodes. And then it kind of goes through the different phases of how this is all going to work, which you can check out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. Now, this goes to what I was saying yesterday about how we obviously need more competition and more kind of like players in the Ethereum staking ecosystem and just ways for people to stake without that 32 ETH requirement. And Obol is one of the things that will be able to kind of like enable people to stake in groups. You know, this technology can be used by kind of like other services such as Rocket Pool and Lido and things like that as well, which is very, very cool. It kind of like stacks on top of it as it is a middleware client, so you can kind of run there. You know, another example of a middleware client that basically runs on anything or middleware protocol that runs on anything is Chainlink, right? It's like an Oracle service. It's not just an Oracle service, but obviously most of the use is kind of like in the Oracles today, and that sits kind of like in the middle and just powers so much of DeFi out there. So that's a good way to think about it. But yeah, for those of you who've been paying attention to this project, you should definitely check out this thread and maybe even get involved with the public testnet if you're an at-home validator to kind of help them along with their testing here. There's the thread and the blog post, obviously, which I'll be linking in the YouTube description below for you to check out. All right, an announcement or a big announcement out of Scroll today. And I'll read out the announcement first, and then I want to give some more thoughts here. But basically, the announcement reads, after over a year of building our zkEVM-based ZK rollup in close collaboration with the privacy scaling group at the Ethereum Foundation, we are releasing the pre-alpha version of Scroll for external testers. And this thread goes through kind of like what you'll be able to do with this. But before I dive into the details here, I just want to kind of like note the scaling wars are getting more and more heated by the day, especially when it comes to zkEVM stuff. I've talked about the zkEVM at length in a recent refuel, so I won't rehash what I said there. But guys, like zkEVM definitely seems like a holy grail thing, and it seems like there's so many teams working on it now, and so many teams wanting to get a production-ready zkEVM out that we're going to get it much sooner than we otherwise would have, which is obviously really, really bullish. I'm super excited for that. But in terms of Scroll's implementation here, they're trying to invite as many testers as possible while they drive towards kind of like their public release. You can sign up if you want to be an early tester at signup.scroll.io. And, what is it? What is included in this pre-alpha alpha testnet? Well, they continue by saying, this initial release we run on a private POA fork of Ethereum, the testnet L1 operated by Scroll. On top of this private chain, we will run a testnet Scroll L2 supporting the following features. Users will be able to play with a few key demo apps, such as a Uniswap fork with a familiar web interfaces such as MetaMask. Very, very cool. Users will be able to view the state of the Scroll testnet via block explorers. Obviously awesome to have that from the get-go. Scroll will run a node that supports unlimited read operations, e.g. getting the state of accounts, and user-initiated transactions involving interactions with the pre-deployed demo apps, e.g. transfers of ERC20 tokens or swaps of tokens. Number 4, rollers will generate and aggregate validity proofs for part of the zkEVM circuits to ensure a stable release. In the next testnet phase, we'll be ramping up this set of zkEVM circuits. 5, bridging assets between these testnet L1 and L2s will be enabled through a smart contract bridge, though arbitrary message passing will not be supported in this release. Scroll's pre-alpha testnet will be the first chance for early users and developers to interact with our infrastructure and experience dApp workflows on Scroll. This is a pretty big release for a pre-alpha testnet, I would say. Like, you usually don't see things like block explorers being released with something that is considered pre-alpha. Like, pre-alpha is pretty funny because obviously it goes like, alpha, beta, and then kind of like a mainnet production. But pre-alpha means that this is kind of like the, still very, very early stages here. But if this is what early stages looks like for Scroll, I'm excited to see what their, alpha and beta looks like, because they have a lot of features here from the get-go that I haven't seen from other pre-alpha or even alpha deployments of similar kind of like technologies here. So I'm very, very excited for this. I definitely kind of like signed up. I want to get my hands on this when I can. But yeah, as I was saying, like the zkEVM stuff, I definitely expect to see much more movement here, especially I think tomorrow at about 1 p.m. Paris time is Polygon's announcement. So I'm curious to see what kind of like comes out of that. But yeah, it's heating up very, very quickly, guys. Like, I think that by the end of this year, we could possibly see a zkEVM ready for, maybe it's in alpha or beta still, but we could see a zkEVM deployed to mainnet Ethereum where developers can actually start building on top of it and users can basically use it, maybe in a limited fashion, but still, like, that would be huge. Like, to give some context, people didn't expect a full-blown zkEVM to actually be live until maybe 2023, maybe, more likely 2024. If we can get it by the end of 2022, that is a huge leap in kind of like scalability here, which I think is just absolutely awesome, right? I think it's an awesome achievement if we can get that done, and it speaks to the level of kind of, I guess, builders we have building layer 2 technologies. They really are some of the best builders in this ecosystem. Anyway, going to leave it at that for now, but definitely check this out. If you haven't yet, you can go to signup.scroll.io to sign up for the pre-alpha testnet. All right, so Spruce put out an update today saying EIP 4361 sign-in with Ethereum has now moved from draft to review as an EIP. This is a huge step in moving sign-in with Ethereum forward as a widely adopted standard. Now, with the EIP kind of like standards here, these do need to kind of like go into a hard fork. So there's two different there's two different ways to kind of like get something adopted on kind of like the standard side or kind of like the, I guess, like protocol side of things. There's the ERCs, which is kind of like an Ethereum request for comments, which, I mean, you're all familiar with ERC20 and the ERCs for NFTs. They don't require hard forks to be implemented into the network. They're basically just a standard that people can follow when developing like a token, for example, and anyone can come up with their own standard, so it doesn't require a hard fork, but an EIP does. Like an EIP requires a kind of like inclusion in a hard fork, where, that'll obviously be in a future hard fork, and its inclusion in a hard fork depends on how much utility it's actually going to add to the network and how much overhead it's going to add to, I guess, like core developers to build it out. And, there are always EIPs that just don't make it in because it's just too much work to be done. It just keeps getting pushed back because there's just more interesting stuff and more pressing stuff that needs to be included. But yeah, EIP kind of 4361, the sign in with Ethereum EIP, I think is one that is definitely very, very important. And you can kind of go read the whole specification here. It does get quite technical, but you can read it for yourself and kind of like how it would improve things. But yeah, we'll see when this gets included. I mean, you guys know that there's going to be a hard fork after the merge called Shanghai. We don't know what's going to be included with Shanghai yet. I would bet that withdrawals for the beacon chain are definitely going to be in that hard fork, but it remains to be seen if the core developers decide that they want to do withdrawals in its own standalone hard fork, and then all the other kind of like EIPs that want to go into the network, or at least a lot of them, such as proto-dank sharding, to be in another hard fork shortly after that, maybe 3 months after that or something like that. I can see that happening because stuffing everything into the same hard fork or network upgrade, I mean, it does kind of like put more complexity into one thing, which means that we could be increasing the attack surface and the security concerns. So it may be worth just kind of like enabling withdrawals for the beacon chain, for staked ETH, right? For rewards in its own standalone fork, and then 3-ish months later we do the kind of like proto-dank sharding, and we do maybe ERP, sign in with Ethereum here, and a bunch of others out there that have been trying to get into the network. But it's always hard to know exactly where it's going to go. It really does depend on resources and kind of like complexity at the end of the day. Like, core developers have to build out this stuff. They have to test it. They have to make sure it's all secure. And the more of these things you stuff into one network upgrade, the more chance there is for something to go wrong, post that upgrade. So you definitely want to keep the complexity down to a minimum, especially for Ethereum, for a network like Ethereum, where it's huge, right? It has so many people using it. It's not like we can move fast anymore. And obviously we don't move fast within the Ethereum Layer 1 ecosystem. And that's why, getting EIPs into the network is very, very difficult, takes forever. I mean, EIP 1559, the most popular EIP in Ethereum's history, which also, fundamentally changed the way Ethereum's fee market worked, but that still took like 2.5 years from an initial draft or initial specification to going into the network on mainnet. So that should give you a bit of context around how long these things can take and why, people shouldn't really rely on these things to happen in a speedy manner. Now, hopefully we can kind of like speed that up as time goes on. Hopefully it doesn't take that long, because I think during that period it was obviously the bear market. There was kind of like less people working on stuff. But as the Ethereum network grows, it just naturally becomes a slower process to get upgrades in, because the core developers and researchers want to be able to take a more measured approach to things, make sure that they're not putting any major bugs into the network, or they're not adding any unnecessary complexity. And there are definitely there is a hierarchy of things at the end of the day that we're going in. Like, there are things that definitely need to go in, such as proto-dank sharding. Like, we need scale for layer 2s. Obviously, we need we need sharding. Like, it's simple as that. It's definitely overdue at this stage. So that is and beacon chain withdrawals is pretty much the top priority post merge as well. So there are things that take priority here for obvious reasons, but then, depending on kind of like how much improvement it can bring, how much people kind of like want it, and how much overall, I guess, complexity it adds to the network, that also plays into things. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, good to see this moving from the kind of like draft to review stage. Now, for those of you who don't know what the EIP kind of like stage looks like, there are a bunch of stages it has to go through. Like the whole governance process, all the kind of like different EIP stages on GitHub and things like that. Like, it's a whole thing. Like, you should go to ethereum.org. I'm pretty sure they have a guide to this. I can't remember all the stages off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure they have like an explanation of how this all works. But it's not like someone can propose an EIP and then they say, okay, I want it in this hard fork, and it just happens. No, like that's not the process at all. Like, it's a very long, arduous kind of like process that is definitely something that is not for the faint of heart. That's for sure. But yeah, you can go to ethereum.org, and I think they've got a section on that there. All right, so a couple of Synthetix updates from the weekend. So this one is a thread, what is Synthetix v3 and why is it important? Let's get into it. And they start off by saying, Synthetix v3 aims to accomplish what Synthetix set out to do many years ago, transforming the protocol into a permissionless derivatives platform. How will Synthetix get to v3 thread? So you can check out this thread. I won't go through everything. Basically, this is really, really great. There's a lot of reading here for you guys to do, but if you're a bullish on Synthetix like I am, definitely worth checking out here. As I've said before on the refuel, I think Synthetix is finally being able over the last few months, or last 6 months at least, to realize their vision a lot more, because of the fact that they're able to scale via optimism. They're getting a lot more usage. I'm sure you've all seen it. They're generating a lot of fee revenue, which is obviously a really, really great sign to see. And they have a strong community backing them as well, and a long-term community. Like, these people that have been part of the Synthetix community have stuck around for a long time. And whenever I see that, I get more bullish on a project. Now, I don't own any SNX tokens currently, and this is obviously not me trying to pump any bags or anything like that. But there are so many shitty projects in crypto, so much short-term value extraction happening, and I feel like when I see a project that has been around for a long time, that has a really dedicated community, that is still building, that is kind of like building products that people actually want to use, I feel like it's worth kind of highlighting those products rather than just skimming over it and being like, oh, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to be pumping anything up. So it's got nothing to do with the SNX token. It's got to do with the fact that we need to be more, I guess, like conscious of these builders and kind of praise them for it. Like, the funniest thing, the grand irony, is that the kind of like Terra ecosystem, Do Kwon and Terraform Labs and whatever, they got all this praise, right? And the people and there were a lot of people who got a lot of shit from that community, such as the Maker community. The Terra community said, oh, we're going to kill DAI, USC is going to overtake it, blah, blah, blah. And then Terra collapses, and that's obviously great vindication for these other teams that were kind of like copying shit from the Lunar Army, or whatever they were called, the Lunatics. But the problem is that we shouldn't just wait for something to collapse, wait for something to die. We should still constantly be kind of like telling these people, hey, like what you're building is really, really cool, and kind of like supporting them and being part of their communities. Because at the end of the day, these people are people, guys. Like, devs and builders, they're people, and they have to put up with a lot of shit. Like, it's not easy building in DeFi, building in crypto, building just in Ethereum generally. It is actually quite hard. It takes a lot of grit to do it. It takes a lot of grit to stick to the same thing as well. Like, Kane from Synthetix has copped a bit of shit before. I remember him and Zoo going at it, which is hilarious now because Synthetix got Kane got the last laugh here. But I remember Kane copping a bit of shit about kind of like, selling some SNX tokens, buying some Sydney side property and all these sorts of other stuff. Whatever. I have no opinion on that. But the thing is that Kane is still building, guys. Like, he's still building. He's still down in the trenches. He's still part of the Synthetix ecosystem. And he's also building a bunch of other things as well. It's not like he's just rode off into the sunset with the money he made and decided to kind of like exit this ecosystem. That's not what he did at all. So the fact that he's still there, still building after so long is obviously a very positive sign as well, I would think. But he's not the only one. Obviously, he has a team that kind of like works with him. There are a lot of people that have worked on Synthetix over the years as well, and there is that community there too. So I'm super excited for Synthetix V3 and kind of like the path towards getting there. I've also been excited to see them kind of gain some actual traction on optimism over the last 6 months, and it seems to be sustainable traction because we know that these layer 2s are obviously where we're going to scale. They get better with time. They're nowhere near what they can kind of scale to, so that's obviously very exciting. It's not going to be a problem, or I guess scale isn't going to be a problem for Synthetix going forward. So that's the first update there. There's also a second update here that the SUSD bridge is now live. So the most used stablecoin on Optimism just got a lot better. Users can now move SUSD to and from Optimism to the Ethereum mainnet. Both directions have been switched on. So very cool to see this, some more interoperability between Ethereum mainnet and Optimism for the SUSD token, which I haven't verified this, but if what Synthetix is saying is true, that SUSD is the most used stablecoin on Optimism, that is a pretty good, or I guess like pretty impressive achievement there, because that means it would be more used than DAI and USDT and USDC, which are definitely much more used on mainnet than SUSD. But I think that's just a function of the fact that Synthetix on the Ethereum mainnet suffered a lot because of the scaling issues, but now on Optimism they are succeeding a lot more. So I'd love to see that, but you can go check out both of these updates. I'll link them in the YouTube description below. All right, so a new release here from the Gnosis Guild. So they've released something called Blogs for DAOs, which is called Tabula. So it's born out of an impromptu Gnosis Guild hackathon. So DAOs and multisigs and any Ethereum-based account can now own publications together. That's really cool. I think that is something that doesn't exist within the kind of, I guess, like Web3 ecosystem right now. So I guess the TLDR here is that you can imagine a DAO being the kind of like top level owner of a publication. So for example, you could assign permissions to people within the DAO and they could kind of like own this entire publication, such as like you can't do this on Medium or Mirror or kind of like Substack or any of those platforms, but you can imagine those same platforms built on something like Tabula here, or Tabula, I think you say it as Tabula here, that you can basically connect your wallet to, just sign in with Ethereum, and if you're part of the DAO, you'll be able to kind of, I guess, like, be the top level account of that publication. So that's very, very cool. This is definitely Web3 stuff. It's not DeFi or anything like that, and this is the sort of stuff that I want to see more of because it kind of, I guess, uses the existing, what's the word I'm looking for? Existing infrastructure, primitives, functionality within crypto, within Ethereum, and takes it to the next level and kind of, I guess, like introduces a feature set that hasn't been available or is not available at this point in time. So this is very cool. And the fact that it came out of a impromptu little Gnosis Guild hackathon here is also very, very cool. So you can read this thread for more details on this and check out the website. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. All right, so I mentioned, I think last week on the Refuel that Dune Analytics now supports Arbitrum data. So they put out a thread yesterday showcasing the top 10 Arbitrum dashboards so far. So you can kind of like scroll through these yourself to check out all of them. But just to give you, I guess, like a taste of what there is, there's an Arbitrum overview dashboard from from Spring Zhang here. There's an Arvet dashboard from 6 Degree Lab, GMX dashboard, Odyssey dashboard, and I mean, just 10 dashboards, right? Like, as I said at the start. So you can check them all out, but I do want to kind of like just showcase the Arbitrum overview here because obviously that is going to give us a top level overview of what Arbitrum looks like. You can see total transactions, total accounts, total contracts, transaction count monthly. Obviously, they had the Odyssey events, so that kind of like spiked up there, but they had to pause that, so it's come down. And you can see here, transactions weekly showcase the same thing. Active users weekly, monthly, all the kind of stats here. There's so many stats here. I'm not going to read them all out. You can go check it out. I'll link it in the YouTube description. But very, very cool to see this. I love keeping track of these metrics, guys. Like, I'm always looking at metrics. I used to actually, now that I think about it, I think I stopped making these videos quite a while ago now, but there was a Daily Gwei series that I did called the Daily Gwei Data Pump, where I looked at all these metrics and I basically went through them all. But the reason why I stopped that series was the fact that there was just too much data to go through, and I didn't feel like I could adequately cover all of it, and adequately kind of like pull the alpha out of it, given the fact that there's just so much kind of like data out there now. There is one tool that I see a lot of people talking about, a lot of people using, called Nansen, in addition to Dune Analytics, which, there's Nansen, Dune Analytics, there's the Block has the data platform, there's Coinmetrics, there's Glassnode. There's so many of these platforms, I just can't keep up with it. Just just too many and too many dashboards on these platforms. So I recommend just for yourselves going through these sorts of things. You can just go to Dune's website or Nansen or anything like that and go through the data yourself and kind of see what you actually want to pay attention to rather than someone reading it to you. I believe there might be some YouTubers out there that look at this kind of like data and they try to get like trading insights from it. I don't actually think you can get trading insights from a lot of that data. I think for me, I just look at it as a curiosity thing to say, okay, how is this thing growing? Is it actually being sustainable? How many users has it got? How many transactions? What's the fees like? Sort of those sorts of things. I'm not looking at these sorts of stuff and being like, okay, well, I can see this is growing, so I'm going to make a bet here, an investment bet. You could for sure use it for that, but my investment bets usually are not based on these sorts of things. They're based on they are and they aren't. Like I definitely look at protocol usage and stuff like that, obviously, because that kind of is how you see product market fit. But I've explained before how there is a very kind of like egregious thing that happens in crypto where something can look like it has product market fit for a very long time, during a bull market, and then it just die off and it becomes like a really bad investment. Like maybe you invested in it thinking, this is awesome, this growth's going to continue, it's all going to be well and good, and then it just doesn't, and the protocol dies, and you've just kind of like lost money on your investment. So I look at obviously the on-chain stuff, obviously the protocol metrics and stuff like that, but I also look at a bunch of other things and the same thing I look at every investment. A team, what's the team like? What's the actual product like? Like, okay, the product is popular now, but is it sustainable, right? And what's the team like? Like, can they actually build this thing? Are they kind of like builders that will build through a brutal bear market? Like stuff like that. Like I'm not going to go through all the things I look at, but it's a lot more than just on-chain stuff. You can't rely on on-chain stuff for everything, and especially for the more established things. Like there was a lot of people going on about like Bitcoin on-chain metrics back when Bitcoin was at like 30, 40, 50K. And then it kind of like came down from there very, very hard. And it's just funny how like, people, they kind of capitulated on that. And they were like, oh, okay, well, now the on-chain data is kind of like saying that it's a screaming buy here. But I was like, okay, well, you were saying it was a screaming buy at this level too. Like you just, it's impossible to just look at on-chain data and kind of like get an actual investing insight from it that is good for the long term. I think you have to take everything holistically. If it was that easy, if you could just look at the on-chain data and get a long-term investment out of it, then everyone would do it. And then the alpha would, funny enough, go away if everyone was doing it, right? But anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. You can check out these dashboards. I'll link them in the YouTube description below. And speaking of Arbitrum, the TxStreet.com website here now has Arbitrum live. So you can basically visualize what the Arbitrum transactions are, where they're coming from, kind of like what gas they're paying, the transactions a second that's happening on the network, all that good stuff by going to txstreet.com/v/eth.-rb, sorry. So you can kind of like launch it here. I mean, you can probably see it on my screen. Yeah, you can see kind of like on the left-hand side here, kind of like what's happening. I think this is kind of like Ethereum there, and that's main Arbitrum on the right-hand side. So if you click up here, you can see the different networks and toggle the views behind it. So if I just want to see kind of like the Arbitrum street, I can. And you can kind of like see all the people queuing up and things like that on Arbitrum side on the left, and then the Ethereum side on the right. So this is a cool way to visualize transactions. I'm sure some of you have seen this before, but definitely go check it out if you haven't yet. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. All right, finally here we have a major announcement out of Lido today. They are launching stETH on Layer 2. So Lido stakers will soon be able to use their stETH assets in DeFi on Layer 2. They seem to be going to support like every Layer 2 network. I think they're going to be basically like every Layer 2 network you see maybe listed on L2Beat is what they want to support, and any others in the future that come online, they're going to want to support those as well. So very cool to see this. Obviously, this is something that is going to be able to expand the Ethereum staking ecosystem through Lido and be able to expand kind of like the users that will be able to access this sort of stuff. Obviously, trying to kind of like get exposure to stETH on mainnet has been cumbersome because it's been expensive, but with this improvement coming, you'll be able to access it on any number of layer 2s on Ethereum, which is very, very cool to see. So you can read their blog post for more details about this. And I think they've got a little thread here as well if you want to. And they're also going to be starting a new kind of like series called L2's Days, which I think, like when I say it out loud, I get it, like L2 Tuesdays, right? But L2's Days, like just seeing it written out here is just a weird thing to me. Until I actually said it out loud, I'm like, why is it called L2's Days? And then I'm like, oh wait, L2 Tuesdays, L Tuesdays. Okay, I get it now. Like, but just reading like it without kind of like saying it out loud, I was kind of like confused by it. But anyway, that's a pointless thing. I don't even know why I was talking about that. But anyway, they got this new series called L Tuesdays happening every Tuesday, where they talk to different like layer 2 teams in the Ethereum ecosystem. So be sure to kind of like set a reminder for those. It's going to be happening on Twitter Spaces. You can go check that out. I'll link it in the YouTube description. But on that note, I'm going to stop rambling. That's it for today. Thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.